Okay, near-death experiences. This is a good one. So, fascinating topic. I should say, if I haven't mentioned it already, I took a course on exclusively on near-death experiences at Claremont School of Theology. My final semester there, my MA program there, and crazy stuff. Crazy stuff. It's a good course. A good course. You should take that course. Yeah. It's a survey course. Survey all the near-death experiences. So anyway, there's a graduate level course on NDEs from an accredited institution, Claremont. Not bad. Roland Faber taught it. Interesting fella. And, so there's a couple things with NDEs. You get veridical details about events taking place when the brain is in a compromised condition, right? So we have these materialism, physicalism theories of consciousness where it's like brain activity generates or is consciousness, depending on generates in terms of emergent theories. It just is consciousness in terms of reductive materialist theories. And what you have is they're called these global workspace theories, where these let me check my notes here, because what it is, you have these widely separated, computationally specialized regions of the brain, right? Whatever your speech center, your motor center, etc. And you get these this electrical activity that shows up on an EEG machine, right? 30 to 70 Hz, coherent, high frequency oscillations that are thought to link these widely separated, right, computationally specialized regions of the brain. And this activity is thought to, for one, it is correlated with consciousness. That's anesthesiologists, right, are basing, right, their prognosis, right? They don't go in and start operating on people until, right, this activity is shut down, right? So there's tons of experimental data, showing the correlation. And then, philosophers go one step further, many, and, say, oh yeah, no, this just is, right, consciousness, or it consciousness emerges from this, or sometimes I'll say supervenes on this. And this is philosophy of mind, and it's not an unreasonable, right, view, right? So what these near-death experiences show, in part, certain features, out-of-body experiences in which somebody, they're hovering over the bed and they see details in the operating room or elsewhere that are confirmed to be true later, right? And so instead of these memories being that would link one person with another, right, through a medium communication or child memory in a past life, it just links the existence of a person being alive and thinking, perceiving, hearing, etc. At a time when they shouldn't, according to right, the materialist leading theories of brain and consciousness, which is rooted in some pretty good experimental data that we use, right, for anesthesiology. We wouldn't be doing surgeries on people, confident they weren't conscious, without this. So that's part of it. And then the other part is mysticism. So there's two stages of these NDEs. One often, one being they leave the body, hover over the body, kind of in the physical world. Sometimes they'll fly around for a while, check things out. And then stage two is there's a movement to another realm, sometimes mediated by a tunnel that's gone through the process. And this other realm is luminous, light oneness, love, beauty. Often one encounters God or some sort of religious figure in them. And so it's like, let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's take a look at. This is Imagine, like the John Lennon song, except he says no heaven. Imagine there is a heaven, right? I think that's what he's doing here. Like, imagine heaven. F you, John Lennon. So, George Ritchie. He was a guy ready to go fight some Nazis in 1943. All right, Camp Barkley, Texas. And he gets a fever, right? And starts walking around, and like the people don't notice him. He's like tripping out. Next thing you know, he's like flying around, going wherever he wants, and some weird experiences. Then he starts like worrying about his body, and he like travels back and looking for it. I think he like sees himself like dead or something. But then, yeah, couldn't believe he was dead. And it's like a sheet being pulled over his body. And then the light in the room started to grow brighter and brighter, and he gets like engulfed in this like brightness, and turns out this brightness is actually a man in the room. The instant he perceived him, a command formed himself in his mind: stand up! And he got to his feet, and this man said, "You are the presence of the Son of God." And he thought about Jesus, the Son of God. He learned about Sunday school, but it was meek and whatever. But this power, the power itself, fused together with an unconditional love that overwhelmed him. And it's an astonishing experience for this fella. And, so there it is. Proof of heaven, right? Is that proof of heaven? Jesus is real, and George Ritchie met him, and you can too if you could just almost die, or really die, presumably, but you got to be good. That's for the message of this book. But let me consult my handbook. Handbook of Near Death. You always got to have a handbook handy. Handbook. And in my handbook of Near Death Experiences, characteristics of non-Western near-death experiences. So let's see if in China, what happens. Do the Chinese have near-death? Maybe it only happens to the good Christians in the West. Maybe some Chinese Christians will have them, Let me see what I can learn. Becker, some fellow, Carl Becker, looked into this in the 80s. Early 90s. Turns out Chinese monks who are important to the founding of Pure Land Buddhism had a NDE or deathbed vision while still reasonably conscious, and one went through a void, no tunnel experiences like so often in the West. However, they encountered religious beings, usually religious figures, supernatural environs, and they interpreted it. I went to the Pure Land, so to the heaven, this is the Pure Land, kind of maybe a correlative to heaven. And it turns out not just the Chinese, but in India. Turns out the research shows early 90s, also 80s, Stevenson, 86, they would encounter supernatural, in a supernatural world, deceased beings and religious figures. Not Jesus, but like, Krishna, whatever. Like, call it religion. And then that's what you see. Sometimes the great Yama himself will appear to those in Thailand, Tibetans. Yeah. What does it say? It doesn't say. I don't know. I didn't underline anything about Tibetans. They have them too. Usually it's like interpreted in terms of like the Tibetan Book of the Dead or whatever, and so on and so on. So you might want to say, tempted to say, well, there's no heaven. Come on, it's just like sociological phenomena, because like all this is not coherent, right? You make the same argument about religions, right? Or like Dawkins like saying in a debate, there's 4,000 gods, right? How would you say yours is true? Thus no religion is true, there is no God, and I win. So you need something stronger. You can't just rely on your imagination, right? Sociological imagination. We need proof. Proof of heaven. He's not just want to imagine, he's got to go prove it. Right? So I'm going to look for the mathematical formula here. A equals, no, it's not math. Shoot. Alright, so this is a popular book, came out like 10, 11 years ago. Ibn Alexander, neurosurgeon, was in a coma for, I think, for like a week or something. And he had like, bacterial meningitis, whatever that is, it's bad. Right, he wasn't awake. He was hooked up, I believe, to like machines that would show if he was awake, and he had quite an experience. It started out pretty gloomy, and I should say there are negative, right, distressing NDEs, which I'll get to, and some of them will start out negative and then progress, and his is one of that. He starts out kind of like he's almost described as being like buried in the earth, like an earthworm, and he's got other objects around him, but they're like roots of plants and stuff or something weird like that. And eventually some light breaks through, and he's got a lot pretty detailed description. I won't go over it all, but key part of it is he's flying around just surveying this like beautiful like landscape, like towns and villages and people playing, sometimes dogs running and jumping, Oh, very nice. And then he notices at some point when he's flying on, it's like the wings of a butterfly. It's got that texture, that beautiful pattern. And then there's someone with him there, a beautiful girl, and she teaches him some things, right? And the messages, he also says it's like nonverbal, and it's like the theme of ineffability runs through the encounter. But the message is that 3 parts. You are loved and cherished dearly forever. You have nothing to fear. There is nothing you can do wrong. This is kind of nice. I'm presuming nothing he could do wrong from this like state of mind or in this heaven. I don't know. I hope he didn't assume that now he's like error free now. Whatever. 10 years later in the experience, he's like, I can do wrong. Butterfly wing girl told me. Later, he recognizes a picture, family house or something, of this girl, and he's like, that's the girl. Yeah, from my experience, it turned out it was like a sister or something he had that he was like separated from at birth, younger, and died. I forget the details on that, but it's not interesting. But yeah, there's a little bit of verification there too. But generally, this experience is all about the transcendent encounter there, and I will continue. Oh boy, it get crazy. So he goes like higher in the clouds, and there's this like flock of orbs that are leaving like streamer like lines behind them. He sees like angels or birds, and it's like higher advanced beings, and they make a sound like a glorious chant that they make, and so this is like all very nice. And he keeps going deeper into this experience, starts kind of asking some questions to the wind, which he assumed it was like God was behind the wind. Where's this place? Who am I? Why am I here? And each time this like question, you get these like answers from inside that bypass language. Thoughts entered me directly, he says, but it wasn't like thoughts we experience on Earth. He was able to instantly and effortlessly understand context that would have taken me years to fully grasp in my earthly life. Right? And my notes here, it's like a direct apprehension of the forms, like Platonic forms, And eventually this orb was living. Sorry. Yeah, that's right. So he moves forward and finds himself in this like immense void, completely dark, infinite in size, yet also infinitely comforting. So this is like the peak of his experience, I would say. Pitch black as it was also brimming over with light, a light that seemed to come from a brilliant orb that I now sensed near me, an orb that was living and almost solid as the songs of the angel beings had been. Right? And compares the situation to a fetus floating in the womb of the mother. But in this case, the mother was God, and he's going to call the God by the pronoun om. Right? That pronoun is very politically incorrect, even back in 2011. Sorry, I'm a Gen Xer. I say politically incorrect instead of woke. Sometimes can't help it, but I'll try to get woke, on fleek. So occasionally he goes back and forth, and the reason he says that is that Om was a sound he remembers that was associated with this like being, Om and God, the real things that came through. And he also kind of said that the orb itself is more of like an interpreter between me and this extraordinary presence surrounding him, right? So it wasn't just God. God's more than just the orb, right? So he's really, really, emphasizing the ineffability, and that there's, even with the visuals, there's something more beyond that, right? It's quite different than what you get with the encounter I read earlier where the guy saw Jesus. So, in any case, yeah, he gets more answers, and so there's many universes. Evil is necessary, so free will. Now, if he was a real philosopher of religion, he would have said, okay, what about natural evil? Free will. Okay, I understand that. For non-natural evil, like humans are bad to each other because God needs to let them have free will. But what about like disease, earthquakes? And I'd like to see what Om would have said, man. But this guy, he's not a philosopher of religion, unfortunately. And but what I like about his experience is interesting about it is that unlike most of the ones that are just interpreted in terms of whatever somebody's religious beliefs, his is it just seems to be driven more just by powerful experience that he struggles to make sense of, and he just grasps into whatever concept he has at hand, but without any religious dogma associated with it at all, right? And that kind of, I would say, the approach I think you want to take to these experiences is really, really, in reflecting upon your own near-death experience, should you had one, right? Was that really Jesus or Krishna, or was it Om, or was it, or am I using some concept to make, incorporate this just incredible thing into my, thing? And this is one of the things that comes up in this academic study of mysticism is the degree to which language shapes the experiences of these profound mystical experiences. Mystical meaning the more intense, profound range of religious experiences. In some cases, they'll restrict mysticism to just when you just want is completely united with the Godhead or ultimate reality. But I'm meaning it in more of a intermediate sense, where it's beyond just a typical, I feel peace and love or whatever. Whoa, something experience that really knocks you on your ass. That's what I would say. It's a mystical experience in a profound way, and that happens in NDEs. So, but real, I guess for the afterlife, evidence is, I think, the heavy evidence anyway, is on these experiences that happen when the brain is not, functioning in a way that it should function in order for somebody to have a conscious experience, and not just conscious, but a conscious vital experience, intelligence and sort of vitality, they're alive, even though I died, or almost died. get to that in a little bit. So, the conventional explanation of consciousness is that this electrical activity either generates, right, or just is consciousness. Either we're doing like emergent materialism or reductive materialism. These experiences question that. So let's look at a couple. Famous cases. Denture guy comes into like a coronary unit. He's blue in the face. They do CPR on him for a while. At some point, the nurse notices he has dentures, takes them out, puts them in a drawer, and this guy comes back out and says that they couldn't find the dentures. He says, "Oh yeah, the nurse put them in the drawer," and so he saw the whole thing, right? And so he's not afraid of dying anymore. There's an afterlife. Another one, this fella Al Sullivan has like a bypass surgery, and he reports, among other things, seeing the surgeon like flapping his arms like a bird. And they look into it, and it turns out the surgeon did indeed do this, and it was something he would do to like signal like sterile environment or need for gloves or something. I forget. Not real important, but the important is that it was unique to that surgeon. It wasn't something that surgeons do, right? And he really did do it, and he knew about it. How could he know, right? He was like, bypass surgery, fully anesthetized. Another one, biggest one probably, is Pam Reynolds. We'll get to that. I'll come back to her. But you might be wondering, what about these are all like in the room, right? Like, what about elsewhere? Well, there's several that come up where the veridical details are given, like not like in the same room where the person is dying or almost dead or dead or whatever, clinically dead, brain or anesthetized, however you want to characterize it. Yeah, they got like 60 cases here that they've been occurring outside of this range, and some of them have accurate perceptions of like unexpected or unlikely details. A famous one, like a woman in childbirth who reported being out of her body and seeing her mother in the waiting room smoking a cigarette. And then the mother admitted, she was a non-smoker, that she tried one or two because she was so nervous. So, in case you're wondering, there's not a ton, but there's some where they experience there's a famous case of the Maria Shu lady that had a NDE with out of body experience, and she reports that, hey, there's a shoe outside the window of the hospital, right? And that was she could not have seen like from her bed, and people like drove by later. It was like, oh, maybe she could have seen it from the street. It might have been visible, and then she like unconsciously remembered. Yeah, it happens. Those happen. But the strongest case really is, I'm going to talk about the more highly studied, debated Pam Reynolds. Gotta talk about Pam Reynolds. If you're not talking about Pam Reynolds, NDE research, you're sloppy little son of a gun. I almost cursed, but I stopped myself. What can I say about Pam? So, Pam Reynolds, I don't know why I looked at my notes. I know this case pretty well. She is early 90s. She in this like Operation Standstill, where they put her under, drained like all the blood from her brain in order to remove I believe like a blood clot or something, like the base of her brain. So it's really, really extreme operation. It took like half a day. And she's a 2-stage experience, one, floating above in the hospital room, reports details, and then second stage where she was into this like transcendent heavenly realm where she meets like deceased relatives. They feed her like light, sparkles, she's like eating light. And it's all very nice, and then comes back And I believe while she was still anesthesiaized, she another veridical report was that she heard them play in Hotel California in the operating room, and she thought it was like, and when she heard the lyric, like you can check out, but you can never leave. Check in, but you can never leave. She thought that was like related to her situation. It was insensitive to play that. But the really significant veridical details is really the strength of this case, I would say, and that was when she was under anesthesiology before they drained all the blood. And what she remembered, she was able to describe like the drill the doctor used to get in her head, that her head was shaped, that the drill like had like a case, different like drill bits or whatever. And then most significantly, a conversation the doctor had with the assistants about I guess they had to do something where there was a problem with like one of her veins, so they had to put in um, uh, something into like a different part of her leg or something, and I can't remember the exact details, but it was a detailed conversation of like kind of a adjustment to the surgery on the fly, the anesthesiology, not the anesthesiology process, but the pre-surgery process, and she had that conversation like perfectly. And the what happens is investigator Michael Sabom, he gets a bunch of cases where maybe he thinks somebody had an operation or a heart attack, maybe they never something, makes a phone call, gets the information, and then he goes to check the details later. And in this situation, when he checked her details, she gave it over the phone. It was like mind-blowingly accurate. One of the strongest cases, veridical cases, he'd come across, or anybody's come across probably. And what's really impressive about the conversation that took place was that she had these like molded speakers in her ears that were emitting these like extremely loud noises, like clicking sounds, like rapidly too. That was, I guess, the equivalent or something to like 10 jackhammers going off in your ears, something extremely loud. And so if she was like awake, right, like she couldn't hear that conversation through that. It'd be really hard. And some people like go debate, like Keith Augustine, talk about like selective hearing, but molded speakers. That's really tough. And then what's his name here? My man, John Martin Fisher. We've already seen from the reincarnation segment. He is a philosopher who took this case on, and Indy's on, and was like, well, maybe unconscious hearing, I don't know about that, but maybe somehow these like audio waves were like recorded in her brain, and then later she was able to like recall them somehow and create this false memory, right, and the vision and everything. So recorded in her brain, and there's no you'd expect like a footnote to some like specialist and like neuroscience, hearing, whatever, memory, somebody like explain how this could work. No such footnote. It's not even clear how recorded in the brain would be different from the unconscious hearing. It just sounds like just kind of very empty spot. Better there, Fisher. But that's what they got to do, because otherwise it's really, really hard to explain, especially when you got all this like visual details like correct, which maybe, I think Keith Augustine said that she was able to describe the drill and the case and stuff because she heard the sound. It reminded her maybe of like a dental drill, and she'd seen that kind of case before. And so pretty strong case. Now, kind of the way it triangulates, if you don't do like ESP, like recreated memory thing, or recorded in brain, lucky guess combination thing, whatever you want to do, a normal or paranormal explanation, but alternative to just her still having a conscious, waking mind, active mind, perceptive of, the world somehow, during this period, it's pretty tough to avoid the conclusion that something's going on here. So it really triangulates around that time, and the fact that the two-stage kind of dovetails nicely with the two stages of the operation when they suck your brain, out or whatever. Although, it would be more impressive, I guess, too, veridically, if, she was able to describe stuff that happened at that stage of the operation. But what we have is pretty good with good old Pam. So that's like the best case. The cardiac wards, this happened quite a bit. There's some actually experimental studies they did where they had subjects who reported having NDEs, witnessed in the recitation process, describe what they saw, and these reports were much more accurate than people. The control group, which was cardiac patients who did not report having a near-death experience, how they thought what happened to them. They have also done these studies where they put objects or things up above the bed or on the wall to see if anybody has an NDD and reports seeing one of those. That has not happened yet. There was an out-of-body experience where a lady did it in the 60s. Not an NDE though. She just could get out of body at will. But there's just a ton of anecdotal reports from cardiac wards, cardiac surgeons, and nurses and stuff that people describe this experience often. AJ Ayer, I think he almost choked to death or something on a pork chop bone or something. I forget what it was, but the analytic philosopher, right? The great logical positivist. And he in the 80s was an older fella, almost died, almost choked to death, and had an NDE. And he put out, there's some rumors going around that he changed his views about the afterlife. He ended up putting out a public statement that his views hadn't changed except for his disbelief in the afterlife had been slightly weakened. But reportedly told an orderly or somebody in the nurse in the hospital right afterwards, he had to rewrite all his books. He had a powerful experience at the time. I should mention more on the negative NDEs. They are, they're bad. You don't want to have a negative NDE. You want to have a positive one. Here did I write that down? Gosh darn it. Well, go from memory. Probably. Oh, yeah, here we go. I should mention, generally, in near-death experiences, there's a broad group of similarities cross-culturally. The experience of another world, of light, very common, love, peace. Many different cultures will have the life review, not all, of course, but many do. Tunnel is the transition feature, is more common in the West. You don't see it so much elsewhere, but sometimes people go through a void or something like that. What else can I say about it significantly? Love, God, ultimate being, very common, especially with maybe people with more medical advanced, if you will, medical physical beliefs. What else can I say? Oh yeah, the negative one. So this is important too because they are underreported. They think, and probably because people just don't want to talk about negative ones, but they happen. It's 12 to 20%. I think figure I saw the reported ones, but could be up as much as a third. Some think. And basically, there's three types of distressing or negative NDEs. Three categories anyway. Sometimes they overlap, but the two most common one is like this like loss of control, where just things are happening, you have no control, and it's not comfortable, right? Kind of scary. Another one is the sense of like a void, where the sense you're not going to exist, or you're going to be stuck in this void-like existence forever. So, I remember hearing like some like when I was a child, some idea of hell. You're just like trapped in like a little bubble, floating in outer space for eternity. So heard that as a 7-year-old, sounded kind of scary. Apparently, some people have this kind of thing. And then we kind of saw even Alexander's experience started with this kind of similar experience where he's like kind of buried in the earth. And then the third is like the hellish kind, where you have like hellish images, terror, fear, pain. And those are the least common of the distressing ones, but they happen. And then there's reactions to these negative ones. Positive ones, the reactions are pretty much like, yeah, that was sick, that was dope. There's like, less fear of death, and that people tend to be more like, moral, I guess, more like, not just since they're nicer to people, but like, like more flourishing, creative. But the hellish ones, the negative ones, right? These ones, there's three really kind of reactions. The one is they try to look, people are trying to learn from them. What kind of lesson do better? One is they just like rationalize, minimize, so, it's just like, brain chemicals or whatever. It doesn't mean anything. And the third is class, I guess, is people that are like haunted by them. So, as to their life, I will say I got this information from the handbook. Got to go to have a handbook of near-death experiences. I would just Google handbook if you want to buy it. Probably get a used one for cheap. Got a good lot of stuff in there. If you want to verify, my work, check my sources. Maybe that study's crap. I know it's pretty good. I like to do it. But I just like to show my sources when possible. NDEs. So, there's also NDEs in the blind people. Some from birth have NDEs with visual, quasi-visual experiences. Some of them confirmed. Fisher takes that one on. I'm not as into that one. It's interesting, but ESP, can you do a lot with ESP? I guess that's about all I want to say. So, all right. Cards on the table, as far as the NDE research goes, I think it's significant. If it was like the strongest like evidence for the afterlife we had, from like parapsychological evidence, I would probably still be more or less a doubter, skeptic, much more skeptical than I am now. I think that reincarnation research and the evidence from mediums, actually the best cases, but body research as a whole, both fields, is more compelling. A couple points, reasons for that, we're briefly mentioning. One, Stephen Brade points this out. Love to plug these guys' books. Immortal Remain, Brade, I talked about him before. Really good guy, good work. He points out that NDEs, they only show really existence of consciousness like for a brief period after the brain, when the brain shut down, or maybe suggest it exists for a little bit longer, right? But he says he kind of compares it to like a fart, but it just lingers in the wind after the So as opposed to cases from like reincarnation research or mediumship, where it's decades, sometimes longer than that later. So point one, the second point is they're not dead, right? That's why it's near-death experience. And if you're open to the super ESP, super psi theory, it's I think it's easier to account for the veridical out of body details, NDEs, through silent is through for the stronger mediumship and reincarnation cases, because it's it's a fairly limited set of facts. It takes place short period of time. Yeah, I saw you doing this, do something like that, and sort of like retrospective clairvoyance or something. It's not as powerful as whatever 2, 3-year-old, 3-year-old kid, saying, yeah, I flew off the Natoma, boat, and my friend, this is what that guy named, my guy I flew with, this was his name, and all this stuff is true. Or a young girl recognizing 20 former friends, a family member from her previous life after identifying and all these details about her house that turned out to be true. Picking people out of crowds, this Hollywood fella, man, Ryan, all these details, statements that have turned out to be true, made, way before they could figure out who this guy was. That's more impressive to me than, oh yeah, I saw my mom smoking a cigarette in the waiting room, or I saw the doctors doing this thing. It's impressive, but it's not like it's mind blowing. However, it is strong enough to challenge that consensus on this, the correlation between this electrical activity in the brain that seems to many to produce or generate consciousness, to say that you say the whole saying, correlation isn't the same as causation, and the suggestion would be that there's something happening there, or some other paranormal, parapsychological explanation, like super ASP is in place. Either way, you're into the paranormal, the supernatural, if you will. Some might say, I don't know, but you're out of the conventional materialistic explanation. You're doing something really weird at that point. So, point one, point two, mysticism. If you're willing to make a case for mysticism, mystical experiences as being evidential for the ultimate reality, in this kind of Platonic sense that I've talked about before, talk about again, I'm sure, quite a bit, where you would say that there is a eternal, perfect reality that one can have a mental vision of, and it'll knock you on your ass and give you wisdom. And that's what happens in these EDs, and the like Socrates says, or Diotima says to Socrates in the Symposium, that this vision of ultimate reality, the perfection of beauty, that you give birth to a real virtue. People who have MDs, or have mystical experiences, or combined, NDEs that have those kind of transcendent NDEs, they will say, yeah, this changed my life, right? I had a guy, I work as a waiter, and I had a fella not too long ago, a few months ago, who, him and his family, they were retired law enforcement officers, and one of the guys, this was his birthday, and his friend was bragging about how he'd gotten shot in the line of duty and was lucky to survive, and so I ended up asking him, so anything else happened during that, while you're in the hospital recovering, or after that? And he said, yeah, I saw the Lord. So he started, and so he started, so did you go to church more after that? And he said, oh yeah, And I have an Uncle Ray. He had, I don't know what he had, a stroke or heart attack. He had some sort of near-death experience, so I think as a young man. And he saw God, Jesus, whatever, and he began going to church again, But not to go to church is necessarily makes you moral, but it's the fact that they just they want to, and it's there's a whole discussion to be had on actually that influence. But broadly speaking, these NDEs make people, less likely to be just total jerks, right? Let's just put it that way. For what it's worth, I think it's worth something. So yeah, mysticism, it supports, I think, big, I guess, a big avenue to which people arrive at some sort of like mystical vision of reality, and God is interpreted by many, and then the veridical details, right, that provide evidence of something happening, whether it's consciousness in the absence of brain activity or some crazy, pretty impressive like ESP, retro clairvoyance, or something precognition, post-cognition. I'm not sure how you'd have to describe it, but you can certainly, someone can make the case to account for those experiences, but that still puts the skeptic, all this stuff on their heels. So that's near death experiences. Hope you enjoyed it.